Hi, welcome to another episode of Real Estate Unleashed. I'm your co-host, Bridget Quinn. You can find me on social media, B. Quinn Realtor.
And I'm Regan Hildebrand. You can find me on social media at Realtor Regan. And welcome to Real Estate Terminology 101.
Part 1.
Part 1. Yeah, we can't get into it all today, but
No.
we'll break down a little bit of some terminology that you might get or hear tossed about in the world of real estate.
Right.
And talk a little bit about what it really means. Some of it, we tend to, as agents, right, we use our big words and don't always explain what the three-letter acronyms or the sometimes four-letter acronyms.
Well, some of those are maybe explicits that come out as well.
That's true too. Yeah, sometimes it's better we don't tell what we really are trying to say.
Yes.
But yeah, there's some terminology in real estate. We thought it'd be a good opportunity to explain a little bit layman's terms and also the who's, what's, and whys behind everything too.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know, when you get into real estate, and especially if you're picking out your agent, and it better be one of us, then you're probably going to hear a lot of little banter and terminology, right? One that pops up a lot that I think people either may not quite fully understand or don't understand the implications of it,
Right.
is fiduciary.
Which I didn't hear a lot of until, honestly, real estate school.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a term that, as you say, is thrown around a whole lot
No.
in the real world.
Yeah, it doesn't come up a lot, but I think it's important to highlight why fiduciary is a term that we as agents, as realtors, like to use.
Realtors.
Realtors,
remember?
yeah. 2 syllables, usually. Fiduciary, more than 2 syllables.
We can count. One, no.
We'll sound it out. But fiduciary, so as real estate agents in North Carolina, we're not required to be a fiduciary, but our realtor code has us as fiduciaries, and we become a fiduciary when you, or whoever we're working with, becomes our client.
Right.
Customers, we're not fiduciaries to.
Nope.
We're not fiduciary to the person on the other side
Nope.
of the transaction. But what is a fiduciary?
Well, we keep things confidential. We have your loyalty. We try to keep you just in good standings on everything. We look out for your best interest as well as our own to a degree.
Yeah, so as fiduciary, it basically means your financial best interest. If it's a matter of, what is the house worth? We have to, as your fiduciary, tell you what the value is here, or what the potential negative value could be as well. So it's kind of like when you're dealing with an investment banker or an investment agent that is looking over your portfolio, setting up your retirement. Not every broker in the world of finance is a fiduciary.
Right.
But when you're looking for somebody to plan out your retirement, you're advised usually to find somebody who's a fiduciary, because that fiduciary has the best interest guaranteed with you as their client in mind. You're not a customer.
Well, as we said before, if your house, based on today's market value, is worth $400, we're not going to tell you it's worth $500 because that's where you want it to be. Do you know what I mean? We have to do our due diligence during the whole thing and make sure that it is what it is.
Yep. And, if we're not acting as fiduciary, then of course we could ostensibly, in an unethical way, ask you to list it higher, hoping to get that because we're going to make more commission off of a higher price. Or we could do some back end dealings with other people to get kickbacks, to make you lose money on the house.
I'm not savvy enough to do all of that shenanigans.
It takes a lot of what's the word, finagling and
wheeling and dealing,
and it gets, it's like walking into a car dealership. You're never going to have a fiduciary relationship with a salesperson.
No.
We're not salespersons. We are real estate agents, realtors, who have, again, a fiduciary duty. So that's why that terminology is at the top of the list.
Super important, actually.
Super important to keep in mind. And it's a good question to ask. If you're working with somebody in real estate, you can ask them straight up, are you a fiduciary for me in this
Some of them may
situation.
not know what that term
And if
means.
they don't know, that's a bad sign, and it probably means they're not,
Yeah.
and walk away.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Other terminology that pops up, though?
I would say recently we have months of supply.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a big thing on that. And we get notifications from our local MLS of, it's a little outdated by the time that we get it, but how many months of supply do we have? And months of supply dictates whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market. It just depends on that particular number.
Yep, and you're right. It's almost like you have to have today's numbers on the months of supply to really be accurate,
Right.
because it's changing so much. And I'm glad that's near the top of the list, because now that we are shifting to a buyer's market, it's important to understand how we calculate that.
Right.
And months of supply is that calculation, which essentially says if we list no more houses at this stage right now, how long will it take to sell out of the current inventory?
Right.
Inventory means houses that are available to buy on the market.
Right.
And right now, if we stop listing, it's about a 2-month supply. So if no one listed another house,
we talked about before when it was the crazy seller's market that, it was literally like days of inventory. So it was, I think the lowest that I saw was around 18 days, something like that.
Yep.
And which you really felt it being out, showing the houses and whatnot, because if you didn't snatch it up in the driveway, you were already left behind. Now you have a little bit of that time to think about the offers and whatnot. So because you do have that inventory out there.
I remember in real estate pre-licensing class, and I had a very stern, I'm not going to say hard-nosed, that word popped into mind, instructor
But
who...
didn't you just say that too?
I did say it, but I didn't say it. Not on record. Well, it is on record. It's on YouTube now. But I had a really stern instructor who just didn't take any BS. And I remember somebody in the class asked, when we were talking about months of supply, they said, why don't we just say days of supply? And he shot her down and said, it'll never be to the point where we number it in days. Now, this was years and years ago, before anybody imagined what we could have gotten into in 2021.
Yeah.
And I look back at that, and he didn't say it out of malice or anything. It was just, in his opinion, having been in real estate himself 25 years, never seen it where we calculated it in days instead of months.
Right. Well, I think even on a strong seller's market, it would be low, but it would never be to that extreme. No. So that was, and we talked about this old, like in the ye old days of our podcast about just craziness.
Yeah,
it's not the norm.
Unprecedented, completely. But yeah, now we do talk about it in months of supply, and it's just a way to gauge how favorable is the market for a buyer versus a seller.
And technically, a buyer's market is
6 months of supply, and we're only at 2, but we already see people reacting to the changes in a way that favors buyers.
Right.
Now, if and when it gets to 6 months, then by historical data points of view, we're in a buyer's market. Meaning that the buyer has more leverage than the seller.
Right.
So that's the only thing we mean by buyers versus sellers market. That's kind of that corollary of this one. But yeah, and then that goes into the third thing that we're going to talk about today, which is days on market.
That's for the actual individual house. How long, as soon as you hit that active button, how long does it sit on the market until it goes under contract?
Yep. And again, like we said, we never used to talk about days of supply as always months of supply. We don't really, because of the historical last 2-3 years, we didn't really even see days on market. Sometimes it was hours on market.
Or no days on market.
Or no days on market at all, because, before anybody could step foot, somebody...
Done.
Yeah, done. And it was go on the market.
Sign in the yard. I'm getting ready to hit active. Oh, you have an offer? Okay.
Yeah, let's back up. So days on market now, though, becomes important because it gives you the ability to kind of gauge, is this house being marketed correctly?
Is it overpriced?
Yeah. Is it just simply in an area that's not getting a lot of attention?
Is there an issue?
Is there something going on with the house that people just are and they're going on to the next one because there's enough months of supply out there that they don't have to deal with this one.
And we've talked about before, if you have 2 houses that are very, very similar, but one is priced significantly cheaper than the other, more than not, people are always going to go for that cheaper option.
Yeah, if
So
and with more months of supply
you
to
have that
that,
opportunity.
you have more in a maybe you're talking about buyers looking in a 10-mile radius.
Right.
In that 10-mile radius, in a more suburban urban area, it's now going to be packed with more months of supply, more houses on the market. Those houses are on the market again, unless they are just showstoppers, and we talked about that in a previous video on how to get into a bidding war. Then the days on market might be creeping up there. And
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's market to market. I don't want to speak
Well, I mean,
outside
it
of
depends on
Charlotte.
price points. There's a lot of factors that go into days on market. Before, to me, even when it was crazy, it was still once you got over that, say, 700, 750 price point, it would always have longer days on market just because not as many people can afford it unless you're
Or
in
shopping in that, yeah.
unless you're in the lake area or, certain things like that. So, as you say, potato, there's a lot of things in that.
So many things go into it, but the key point is to know, like for your individual situation, how many days on market should you be expecting
Right.
if you're out there shopping. Had clients ask me just this past weekend, this house has been on the market 120 days. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? And it might not be a
Both.
bad thing in a normal market like we're basically in now, where it just could be that it's just a little bit more rural. It's not getting eyes on it as much. It doesn't check like
Enough
the
boxes.
yeah, for the average buyer. And to your point, it was priced a little bit higher outside of that normal maybe first time home buyer box. So yeah, it's all dependent, but days on market is important as both buyer and seller to understand
Right.
what it does for your marketing, what it does for your if you're on the buy side, how aggressive you want to be towards it.
Right.
You know. But then once you find the right house and you're under contract, then we kind of shift into or getting not under contract, but making an offer, all these little pieces start to come into play.
They do. They do.
Yeah. And, looking at a house, survey comes up a lot. What is a survey? Why do you need one?
There's a lot of reasons why you should get a survey. I feel like a lot of people don't get surveys, but they should.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's a misconception around survey is a survey just lot lines or is it something more? And a survey can only be done by a licensed surveyor. Just because you can pull up something in county maps or what we sometimes call GIS, another three-letter acronym, but just because you can look at either Google or some aerial view and see imaginary lines doesn't mean those are survey lines. Surveyors come out to the site. They use surveying equipment. They look for actual, in most cases, it's iron in the ground, like a piece of rebar that wasn't the house was originally platted, was hammered in. And then they use all their fancy equipment, which is just like black magic to me. I don't know. And then they come up with an actual survey that gets deeded. And deeding means it's recorded along with your house deed to your house in the county records, and now it's a matter of fact.
Right.
So survey,
They can show encroachments, which is a big thing. They can show like easements and all of that sort of stuff that goes on it. So
and an encroachment basically means something is sitting on your property that shouldn't
that
be.
should not be.
It might be the neighbor's shed. It might be the neighbor's fence. It could be a driveway. Anything.
And there's ways around it. If it's a shared driveway, there's always obviously some sort of easement access that you can have. And
Or an encroachment agreement can
Yeah.
be written by the
Yeah.
attorneys. All these things can be fixed, but the important part about a survey is if you're buying a house, that survey needs to be done before closing so that if there is an issue, encroachment, easements that come up, then the seller who's selling you the house is liable or needs to be in charge of making it right. Versus if you don't do it until afterwards, you now are stuck with the
especially
problems.
if you have a larger piece of land too, or maybe some farmland, and you want to know what is yours.
Yep, yep. It's information that needs to be in front of you as the buyer. And then if you're going to be selling, you should also have a good idea. So it's not a bad idea, if you're thinking about marketing it, to get a survey ahead of time
Right.
to discover everything. Just having information, in front of you. Information's good.
Information. I was going to say information is good.
Yep.
Never too much information.
No, and speaking of, that would take us to number 5 on the list. Our first little 3-letter acronym.
CMA. I actually like doing CMAs.
CMAs are fun. CMA, comparative market analysis. Just a fancy way of saying that we, as the real estate agents, take a bunch of data, crunch a bunch of numbers, compare your house, either
Your
that you're buying or selling. Subject property. So if you're the seller, your subject property is the house you want to sell. If you're the buyer, your subject property is the house you're looking at buying. And compare it to 3, 4, maybe 5 different other properties.
Of similar
size, location,
bedrooms, bathrooms,
layout. We don't compare 3-story houses to
a
ranch. And maybe there's some times you might have to, but typically not. Don't compare townhomes and condos to single family houses or duplexes. Yeah, you're comparing apples to apples. Or if there is not a genuine one-to-one comparison, we make what's called adjustments to those numbers, accounting for the differences. So if the subject property's got no garage, but one of the comparison properties has 2 garages, we adjust based on what the value is for a 2-car garage.
Right.
And that changes from where you are. So don't ask us how much a 2-car garage is worth.
And sometimes they're harder than I think they should be. Like I was doing one recently for in the Huntersville area, and like to me the prices were all over the place on the closed houses. And some of them were a lot larger, like twice the size, and it was not as normal as close as I like to get.
Yeah.
So it was a little more tricky. There was a lot more of the adjusted price comparison.
Yeah, and it's different than just taking price per square foot, which is easy math because you have to do those adjustments. Very similar to an appraisal, but we're not licensed appraisers. So it's more, again, informational for our clients to be able to make a smart decision on either the list price or on the offer price that they want to make on the buy side. Yeah.
Market value.
Yep. And then finally, the last little 3-letter acronym for today's is CC and R's. Covenants, codes, and restrictions.
Ooh.
If you're in a neighborhood, you may or may not have an HOA.
Right.
But even if you don't have an HOA, you could still have covenants, codes, and restrictions.
You could.
And these are deeded documents prepared by attorneys when the development was first built.
Yep.
They don't have to be in a development. You could have 2 houses on 2 parcels of land that get together and create CC&Rs, maybe to protect
maybe to say not in future subdivide,
or nobody's going to
have livestock
or animals or do this or that, but all parties have to agree that have an ownership interest in it, and then again an attorney writes it up and it gets to be part of the deed records as well, the county courthouse. But CC&Rs, the covenants, codes, and restrictions, most of the time people are focused on the restrictions part, what you can and can't do with the property. But the covenants are what binds everybody together. The codes are, again, just codes on buildings and things that you can do with the land, etc.
Most of the time you find them in HOA neighborhoods.
Yeah, but some can be hidden. And part of our responsibility, again, that fiduciary responsibility as agents, is to look for those.
Right.
They might be outdated.
Sometimes they're very tricky to find.
Yeah, and there's a new thing in North Carolina that basically says there's some 30-year gaps that go, and if the covenants, codes, and restrictions have either not been looked at or were part of another transaction, I don't know how it works, this attorney wording and all that, after 30 years, they
are null and
might
void.
Be null and void, yeah. Or if there was something written into them decades ago before
language-wise,
Civil Rights Acts.
I've seen some of those.
I have too. That's null and void
anyway.
because of the Civil Rights Act and fair housing.
Right.
So they get complicated, but essentially you just need to know as a buyer or seller that covenants, codes, and restrictions do what we call run with the land.
Right.
Which means even if you tear down the house, the covenants, codes, and restrictions are still
apply.
there.
Yep.
Yeah. A lot of terminology.
That's why we're going to have
break it into 2 parts.
multiple parts.
When
Stay tuned for part 2.
Part 2. When we get back to part 2, we talk a little bit about what happens, when you're under contract
Right.
with all the
And more
terminology.
the everyday terms that you're kind of going to hear from us.
Yeah.
More on the everyday.
Yeah. Some of these
Whatever.
they never deal with, but it's a fun part of real estate life.
Yes.
Just tripping over terminology. So we hope that's useful. We hope that you got a little something from that. Please hit the like button and the subscribe button for us down there if you're not already subscribed and following.
Like, share, comment.
Yeah, in the comments, what I'd like to challenge everybody to do is to put a term that you think is ridiculous or makes no sense for real estate. Throw it in the comments. We'll see if we can tie it into another video.
Yeah, that'll be good.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. I am Regan Hildebrand with the Home Team Realty Group. Find me on social media at Realtor Regan.
And I am Bridget Quinn. You can find me on social media, B Quinn Realtor. And as always, we'll catch you next time.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.